The telegram arrived on the hottest day of August 1883, and Katherine Newsome read it 3 times before her hands started shaking so badly she had to set it down on the general store counter in Hamilton, Nevada. Her father was dead. The ranch in Colorado that she had never wanted, but was now solely hers, sat waiting like a burden she could not refuse. Katherine pressed her palm against the rough wooden counter and tried to breathe through the tightness in her chest. The store smelled of coffee beans and leather and dust, familiar scents that did nothing to calm the spiraling thoughts in her mind. "Miss Newsome," the clerk's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you quite all right?" Katherine looked up at him, this boy who could not have been more than 16, and realized she had no answer. Was she all right? She had not been all right in years. Not since her mother died when she was 14. Not since her father sent her away to live with her aunt in Hamilton because he could not bear to look at her and see his dead wife's face. Now he was gone too, and she was 22 years old with a cattle ranch she knew nothing about and a mind that would not stop inventing disasters. "I need to arrange travel to Colorado," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "To Glenwood Springs." The clerk nodded sympathetically. "The train will get you to Denver. From there you'll need a stagecoach west. Takes about 3 days total, maybe 4 depending on the weather and the roads. 4 days. 4 days of sitting still while her thoughts ran wild. 4 days of imagining everything that could go wrong. The train derailing. The stagecoach overturning. Bandits on the road. Arriving to find the ranch burned down or stolen or simply gone, dissolved like morning mist because nothing good in her life ever seemed to last. Katherine paid for her small bag of sugar, the errand that had brought her to the store in the first place, and walked out into the brilliant Nevada sunlight. Hamilton was a small mining town nestled in the mountains, and she had grown to appreciate its quiet pace over the 8 years she had lived here. Her aunt's house sat at the end of the main street, a tidy white structure with blue shutters that Katherine had painted herself 2 summers ago. Her aunt was in the garden when Katherine arrived home, kneeling among the tomato plants with her wide-brimmed hat shading her face. "Aunt Margaret," Katherine said, and something in her voice made the older woman look up immediately. "What's happened?" "Father is dead. A fever, they said. Quick." Katherine handed her the telegram, watching as her aunt's weathered face tightened with grief and something else. Worry, perhaps, for what would become of Katherine now. "Oh, my dear girl." Margaret stood and embraced her, smelling of earth and rosemary. "I'm so sorry." "I have to go to Colorado," Katherine said into her aunt's shoulder. "The ranch is mine now." Margaret pulled back, studying her face. "You don't have to keep it, Katherine. You could sell it, stay here with me." The offer was tempting, so tempting that Katherine almost said yes immediately. But something stopped her. Maybe it was pride or duty, or the smallest flicker of curiosity about the place her father had loved more than he had loved her. Maybe it was the hope that going there would finally quiet some of the anxiety that had plagued her for as long as she could remember. "I need to at least see it," Katherine said. "I need to understand what he chose over me." Her aunt's eyes filled with sadness. "Your father loved you, Katherine. He was just a man who didn't know how to live with his grief." "Neither do I," Katherine admitted. "I worry constantly, Aunt Margaret. About everything. About things that haven't happened and probably never will. I wake up in the night convinced the house is on fire or you've fallen ill or the world is ending. I'm tired of being afraid." Margaret took her hands. "Fear is not weakness, dear one. It's what we do with it that matters." Katherine left Hamilton 5 days later on a cool morning that promised autumn was coming. Her aunt pressed a small Bible into her hands along with a packet of letters her father had written over the years, letters Margaret had saved that Katherine had always refused to read. The train journey was as nerve-wracking as she had anticipated, every strange noise sending her heart racing, every stop making her count and recount her belongings to ensure nothing was stolen. By the time she reached Denver, she was exhausted from her own vigilance. The stagecoach heading west was crowded with travelers. A merchant and his wife, two miners heading back to the mountains, and a cowboy who climbed in last and took the seat directly across from Katherine. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He touched the brim of his hat to her politely. "Madam." "Sir," Katherine replied, pressing herself against the window to maintain as much distance as propriety and the cramped space allowed. The cowboy settled into his seat with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own skin. He wore typical range clothing: denim trousers, a cotton shirt faded from many washings, a leather vest, and a red bandana around his neck. His boots were worn but well maintained, and he carried a bedroll and saddlebags that he positioned carefully at his feet. As the stagecoach lurched into motion, Katherine gripped the edge of her seat and began her familiar litany of worries. The horses might bolt, the driver might be drunk, the wheels might come off. They might encounter outlaws or hostile weather or any number of catastrophes that lurked just beyond her ability to prevent them. "First time heading into the mountains?" the cowboy asked, his voice a low drawl that suggested Texas origins. Katherine glanced at him. "Is it that obvious?" "You've got the look of someone expecting trouble." He said it kindly, without judgment. "I always expect trouble," Katherine said before she could stop herself. "It's exhausting." The merchant's wife leaned forward. "Are you traveling alone, dear? That's rather dangerous for a young woman." "I'm going to Glenwood Springs," Katherine explained. "I've inherited my father's ranch." "The Newsome place," one of the miners interjected. "I know it. Good land, right along the river. Your father ran cattle there for near about 15 years. Katherine nodded, trying to feel some connection to this information and finding none. Her father was a stranger who happened to share her blood. The ranch was just a collection of buildings and animals that now belonged to her by accident of birth. The cowboy was watching her with those creek-colored eyes, and Katherine had the uncomfortable sensation that he could see more than she wanted to reveal. She turned deliberately to the window, watching the landscape change as they climbed into the mountains. Pine forests replaced scrub brush, and the air grew thinner and cooler. They stopped for the night at a way station, a rough building that offered beds and hot food for travelers. Katherine barely touched her dinner, too busy worrying about bed bugs and food poisoning and whether the building might catch fire while they slept. She lay awake in the women's quarters, listening to the merchant's wife snore and cataloging every creak and groan of the structure. In the morning she was pale and drawn, and the cowboy studied her with a small frown as they boarded the stagecoach again. "You didn't sleep," he observed. "I rarely do," Katherine admitted. She was too tired to maintain polite pretenses. "I worry too much." "About what?" "Everything." Katherine laughed, but it came out bitter. "Anything. Things that have a 1 in 1,000 chance of happening. Things that are completely impossible. My mind doesn't discriminate. It just keeps inventing new disasters." The cowboy was quiet for a moment, and Katherine expected him to change the subject or offer some useless platitude about how she should simply stop worrying, as if she had never thought of that herself. Instead, he said, "My name is Henry Wade. I'm heading to Glenwood Springs, too. Been working on a ranch north of there, but my contract ended. Thought I might look for something new." Katherine wasn't sure what to do with this information. "Katherine Newsome. Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Newsome." Henry shifted in his seat, leaning forward slightly. "I've got a proposal for you if you'll hear it." She tensed immediately. Strange men offering proposals to unaccompanied women rarely meant anything good, but Henry's expression was earnest, not predatory. "I'll be looking for work when we arrive," he said. "And you'll be running a ranch you know nothing about. Seems like we might be able to help each other. I could hire on as your foreman, at least temporarily, help you get your feet under you, make sure everything's running proper." "I don't know you," Katherine said immediately. "You could be anyone. You could be planning to rob me or worse." Henry nodded as if he had expected this response. "That's fair. Tell you what, when we get to Glenwood Springs, ask around about me. Ask the marshal, ask any of the ranchers in the area. I worked for Tom Brennan for 2 years, and before that, I was with the Circle K outfit down in Texas. I can give you names and references. You can check me out proper before you make any decisions." It was a reasonable offer, Katherine had to admit, and she desperately needed help. The telegram from her father's lawyer had included a brief description of the ranch. 200 acres, about 100 head of cattle, 2 ranch hands who might or might not still be there, a house and barn and various outbuildings. She knew nothing about running such an operation. She barely knew which end of a cow was which. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "After I've made inquiries." Henry smiled, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to genuinely warm. "That's all I ask." The rest of the journey passed more easily with conversation. Henry told her about his childhood in Texas, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about following the cattle north and discovering he preferred Colorado's mountains to the flat plains of home. Katherine found herself relaxing incrementally, though her anxiety never fully retreated. She told him about Hamilton, about her aunt's garden, about the quiet life she had built there. She did not tell him about the nightmares or the times she had been too afraid to leave her room for days at a time. She did not tell him about the darkness that sometimes threatened to swallow her whole. Those truths were too raw, too shameful to share with a stranger. They reached Glenwood Springs on a bright afternoon, the town sprawling along the Colorado River with mountains rising dramatic on all sides. The hot springs that gave the town its name sent steam rising into the crisp air, and Katherine could smell sulfur mixing with pine. It was beautiful, she had to admit, in a wild, untamed way that made Hamilton seem very safe and very far away. Henry helped her down from the stagecoach, his hand warm and steady on her arm. "The lawyer's office is just up the street," he said, pointing. "And the marshal's office is next door to it, if you want to start checking on my credentials." Katherine appreciated that he did not pressure her or seem offended by her caution. "Where will you be?" "I'll head to the saloon, see about a room and a bath. Been wearing this trail dust too long." He touched his hat brim. "Good luck, Miss Newsome. I hope things work out for you." She watched him walk away, tall and capable, and somehow reassuring even as he left. Then she squared her shoulders and headed for the lawyer's office. The lawyer, a Mr. Pemberton, was a fussy man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He expressed his condolences, and then launched into a detailed explanation of her inheritance. The ranch was indeed hers, free and clear, though there were some outstanding debts at the general store and feed supply that would need to be settled. The 2 ranch hands, brothers named Jack and Samuel Porter, were still there as far as he knew, maintaining the property and the cattle. "Your father was a good man," Pemberton said, peering at her over his spectacles. "Kept to himself mostly, but honest and hardworking. The ranch is in decent shape, though it will need a woman's touch, I expect. The house has been without one for some time." Katherine accepted the keys and various papers, her hands trembling slightly. This was real. She owned a ranch now. She was responsible for land and animals and employees. The weight of it pressed down on her shoulders like a physical thing. She left the lawyer's office and stood on the wooden sidewalk, breathing carefully. The marshal's office was right there, just as Henry had said. She could go in and ask about him. But what if they told her he was a criminal or a drifter or completely unreliable? Then she would be alone again, facing this enormous responsibility with no idea how to proceed. Katherine forced herself to walk through the marshal's door. The marshal was a lean man in his 50s with a gray mustache and watchful eyes. He listened to her question about Henry Wade and then nodded slowly. "I know Henry. Good man, steady hand. Worked for Tom Brennan without any trouble, and Tom's particular about who he hires. Heard Henry was looking for a new position since his contract ran out. You thinking of taking him on?" "I might be," Katherine said. "If he's trustworthy." "He's that," the marshal confirmed. "Honest, doesn't drink to excess, knows his business. You could do a lot worse for a foreman." Katherine thanked him and left, feeling marginally more confident. She walked through the town, noting the bank, the general store, the hotel, the church. Glenwood Springs was larger than Hamilton, bustling with activity from the railroad and the mining operations in the surrounding mountains. It felt overwhelming after the quiet she was used to. She found Henry at the saloon, as he had said, sitting at a table with a plate of food and a cup of coffee. His face brightened when he saw her. "That was quick," he said, standing. "What's the verdict?" "The marshal vouched for you," Katherine said, "and the lawyer confirmed that I desperately need help." Henry pulled out a chair for her. "Have you eaten? You should eat something before we head out to the ranch. It's about an hour's ride." Katherine sat and ordered soup, which was all her nervous stomach could handle. While she ate, they discussed terms. Henry would work as foreman for standard wages plus room and board. He would manage the ranch hands, oversee the cattle operation, handle the day-to-day running of the property. Katherine would learn from him, gradually taking on more responsibility as she gained knowledge and confidence. "I should warn you," Katherine said, setting down her spoon. "I'm not easy to work for. I'll question everything. I'll expect detailed explanations. I'll probably drive you mad with my constant worrying." Henry's expression was kind. "I reckon we'll manage." They rented horses from the livery, and Henry tied his bedroll and bags behind his saddle while Katherine arranged her small trunk to be delivered to the ranch later. She had not ridden in years, and mounting the gentle mare the livery owner provided required all her courage. Heights, she remembered too late, terrified her almost as much as everything else. Henry swung into his saddle with easy grace and kept his horse close to hers as they rode out of town. The road followed the river, winding through stands of cottonwood and pine. Wildflowers bloomed in impossible colors along the banks, and the mountains rose so high and close that Katherine felt like they might topple onto her at any moment. "It's beautiful country," Henry said, clearly trying to distract her from her white-knuckled grip on the reins. "Your father chose a good spot." "I wish I had known him well enough to understand why," Katherine said. The words came out more honestly than she intended. "He sent me away when I was 14, said I reminded him too much of my mother. I suppose grief makes people do strange things." "I'm sorry," Henry said simply. "That must have been hard." "It was." Katherine took a shaky breath. "But my aunt was kind. She gave me a home when I needed one. Now I suppose I have to figure out how to make a home here." The ranch appeared around a bend in the road, and Katherine's first thought was that it looked solid and well-maintained. The house was a two-story structure made of logs, with a wide porch across the front and stone chimneys at both ends. The barn was large and freshly painted red, and various corrals and outbuildings dotted the property. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and she could hear the river rushing nearby. Two men emerged from the barn as they rode into the yard. They were clearly brothers, both tall and sandy-haired, one perhaps 30 and the other a few years younger. They removed their hats as Katherine dismounted, somewhat awkwardly, from her horse. "Miss Newsome," the older one said, "I'm Jack Porter. This is my brother Samuel. We're real sorry about your father." "Thank you," Katherine said. She introduced Henry and explained his new position, watching carefully for any signs of resentment or resistance. But the brothers just nodded, looking relieved. "We've been doing our best to keep things running," Jack said. "But we're glad to have proper management again. Your father was a good boss. Fair, paid on time, treated us decent." Samuel spoke up, his voice quieter than his brother's. "The house is clean. We've been taking turns going in every few days to dust and air it out. Figured you'd be coming eventually." Katherine felt a surge of gratitude toward these men who had maintained her father's property even after his death, who had cared for a place that meant something to them even though it had been abandoned by its owner's only heir. "I appreciate that more than I can say." Henry took charge of settling the horses while Jack and Samuel gave Katherine a tour of the property. They showed her the barn with its neat rows of stalls and the hayloft above. The chicken coop, where 20 or so hens pecked and scratched. The springhouse built over a cold stream to keep milk and butter fresh. The smokehouse, the workshop, the tack room. The cattle were out on summer pasture, they explained, grazing the higher meadows where the grass was still green and plentiful. They would need to be brought down before the first snow, probably in late October, and the calves sorted out for market. It was good stock, Jack said with pride. Her father had built the herd carefully over the years, selecting for hardiness and temperament. Katherine tried to absorb it all, but the information overwhelmed her. There was so much to know, so much that could go wrong. What if she made a terrible decision and lost everything? What if the cattle got sick or the barn burned down or they had a hard winter and half the herd died? What if she failed at this the way she felt like she had failed at everything else in her life? "You all right, miss?" Samuel asked, watching her face. "You've gone pale." "I'm fine," Katherine lied. "Just tired from the journey." Henry returned from the barn and seemed to assess the situation immediately. "Why don't we call it a day?" he suggested. "Let Miss Newsome settle into the house and we can start fresh in the morning." Jack and Samuel headed back to the bunkhouse, a solid structure near the barn where the ranch hands lived. Henry carried Katherine's bags up to the porch and then paused at the door. "Would you like me to come in with you?" he asked. "Or would you prefer some privacy?" Katherine knew the sensible answer was to send him away, to maintain propriety and boundaries. But the thought of entering her dead father's house alone, of facing whatever memories and ghosts waited inside, made her throat tighten with anxiety. "Come in," she said. "Please." Henry opened the door and let her precede him inside. The front room was spacious and masculine, with heavy furniture and hunting trophies on the walls. A stone fireplace dominated one end, and windows looked out over the porch toward the mountains beyond. Everything was indeed clean and orderly, thanks to the Porter brothers' care. Katherine walked through slowly, taking in the kitchen with its iron stove and pump at the sink, the dining table that could seat 8, the parlor with its bookshelf and comfortable chairs. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms, one clearly her father's, 2 others set up as guest rooms, and a smaller one that might once have been intended for a child. Her father's room felt like an invasion to enter. Katherine stood in the doorway, looking at his bed with its simple quilt, his dresser with a comb and brush laid out neatly, his wardrobe full of clothes he would never wear again. A photograph on the bedside table caught her eye, and she moved closer to examine it. It showed a young couple with a baby. Katherine recognized her mother from other pictures she had seen, beautiful and laughing, holding an infant that must have been Katherine herself. Her father stood beside them, his arm around her mother's shoulders, his expression so full of love and pride that it made Katherine's chest ache. He had loved them once. He had been happy once. Then her mother died, and he could not bear it, could not bear Katherine because she carried her mother's face, and so he had sent away the last piece of his happiness and lived here alone with his grief and his cattle. "I'm so angry at him," Katherine whispered. She had not realized Henry had followed her upstairs until he spoke behind her. "You have a right to be. But I'm sad too, and I feel guilty for being angry when he's dead and can't defend himself." Katherine turned to face Henry, surprised by the tears on her cheeks. "Is that normal?" "To feel everything all at once, I think so," Henry said gently. "Grief is complicated. Add in old hurts and unanswered questions and it gets even more tangled." Katherine wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I don't know why I'm telling you all this. You're my employee." "It's not appropriate." "Maybe not," Henry agreed. "But sometimes we need to talk to someone, appropriate or not, and you've been carrying a lot by yourself for a long time, I reckon." He was right, though Katherine did not want to admit how right. She had been alone with her anxiety and her grief for years, managing it all in silence because she did not want to burden her aunt or appear weak or mad. Having someone witness it, even this near stranger, felt both terrifying and oddly relieving. "I should let you rest," Henry said. "I'll be in the bunkhouse with Jack and Samuel if you need anything. We'll meet in the morning to go over the ranch accounts and make plans." After he left, Katherine stood in the empty house and listened to the silence. It was different from the silence of her aunt's house in Hamilton. This was larger, wilder, full of the sound of the river and the wind in the pines. It was the silence her father had lived in for 8 years, and Katherine wondered if it had comforted him or driven him deeper into loneliness. She chose one of the guest rooms for herself, unable to sleep in her father's bed or the small room that might have been meant for her. She unpacked her few belongings and then sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window at the darkening sky. The worries came, as they always did. What if she could not do this? What if she failed and lost the ranch? What if Henry turned out to be untrustworthy after all? What if Jack and Samuel quit? What if the cattle died or got stolen? What if there was a fire or a flood or an earthquake or any of the 1,000 other disasters her mind could conjure? Katherine lay down and pulled the quilt over herself and tried to breathe through the tightness in her chest. Tomorrow, she told herself. She would deal with tomorrow when it came. For now, she just had to survive the night. She woke to roosters crowing and sunlight streaming through the window. Her sleep had been restless but more than she had expected, and she dressed quickly in one of her practical day dresses before heading downstairs. The kitchen was cold, the stove unlit, and Katherine realized she would need to learn how to operate it. Another skill she lacked, another thing to worry about. A knock at the door made her jump. Henry stood on the porch with a basket. "Thought you might not have had time to sort out breakfast," he said. "Samuel sent over some biscuits and bacon from the bunkhouse." Katherine accepted the basket gratefully. "I don't know how to cook on that stove. I'll show you later if you want. Or you're welcome to take meals with us in the bunkhouse until you get settled." Henry shifted his weight. "No shame in not knowing something. We all had to learn once." They ate on the porch, watching the sun climb over the mountains and light up the valley. The biscuits were good, the bacon crispy and salty, and Katherine realized she was actually hungry for the first time since receiving the telegram about her father's death. "Tell me what needs to happen today," she said. Henry pulled out a small notebook. "First, we should go through your father's records. See where things stand financially, what supplies we need, what projects are pending. Then I want to ride out and check on the cattle, make sure they are all accounted for and healthy. You should come along, start learning the herd and the property." "I'm not a very good rider," Katherine admitted. "You'll get better with practice." Henry's tone was matter of fact, not judgmental, "and I'll make sure you're on a steady horse." They spent the morning in her father's study, a small room off the parlor that Katherine had barely glanced into the night before. A large desk dominated the space, its surface covered with ledgers and papers. Henry went through everything methodically, explaining what each document meant. The ranch was solvent, which was a relief. Her father had been careful with money, maintaining reserves for emergencies and hard times. The cattle were healthy according to the most recent notes, and the summer grazing had gone well. There were arrangements with a cattle buyer in Denver for the fall sale, contracts that would need to be honored. "Your father was organized," Henry observed. "He kept good records, maintained his equipment, invested back into the ranch. This is a solid operation, Miss Newsome. You've got a good foundation to build on." Katherine felt some of her anxiety ease. This was not a disaster. This was not a catastrophe waiting to happen. This was just a business, like any other, that required attention and care and reasonable decisions. After lunch, they rode out to check the cattle. Henry put Katherine on the same gentle mare from the day before and kept his horse close to hers as they climbed into the high pastures. Jack and Samuel came along, and Katherine listened as the men discussed the herd with easy expertise. The cattle were beautiful in a way Katherine had not anticipated. Black and brown and red, grazing peacefully in meadows thick with wildflowers and grass. Calves kicked up their heels and ran in small groups, testing their strength. The bulls watched the humans with wary eyes but made no aggressive moves. "About 90 head total," Jack reported after they had ridden through and counted. "We'll want to cull out maybe 15 or 20 of the steers for market. Keep the best heifers for breeding." Your father always maintained a good ratio. They rode to the far boundaries of the property, Henry pointing out landmarks and fences that would need repair before winter. Katherine tried to memorize it all, but the scale was overwhelming. 200 acres was so much more than she had imagined. So much space, so much responsibility, so much that could go wrong. As if sensing her spiraling thoughts, Henry maneuvered his horse closer. "You don't have to learn everything today," he said quietly. "This is a lifetime of knowledge. Your father built it over 15 years. Give yourself time." "Time is exactly what worries me," Katherine said. "What if I don't have enough time? What if something terrible happens before I figure out what I'm doing? Then we'll handle it when it comes. That's all any of us can do." Over the next few weeks, Katherine fell into a routine. She woke early and helped Samuel with the chickens, learning to collect eggs and feed the hens. She practiced cooking on the big kitchen stove under Jack's patient instruction. She rode out with Henry daily to check the cattle and learn the property. She studied her father's records and tried to understand the business of ranching, and she worried. She worried constantly about everything and nothing. She worried the cattle would contract some mysterious illness. She worried the barn would catch fire. She worried about early snow and drought and market prices, and whether Henry would decide to leave and find work elsewhere. She worried about her own competence, her own worthiness to run this place. Henry noticed, of course. He was observant in a quiet way that Katherine found both comforting and unsettling. He seemed to know when she was spiraling into anxiety and would find small tasks to ground her. Counting fence posts, sorting tack, anything that required focus and produced tangible results. One evening in early September, they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The air had turned cooler, carrying the first hint of autumn. Henry whittled a piece of wood, his knife moving in smooth, practiced strokes, while Katherine pretended to read a book she could not concentrate on. "I worry constantly," she confessed suddenly, setting the book aside. "I can't help it. It's like there's a voice in my head that never stops imagining disasters, even when things are going well, especially when things are going well, because that just means something terrible is overdue." Henry paused in his whittling and looked at her. "That sounds exhausting." "It is." Katherine pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I've been this way since my mother died. Maybe before, I don't remember. My aunt tried to help. She took me to doctors, but they just said I was high-strung or had a nervous disposition. They prescribed tonics that made me sleepy but didn't stop the worrying." "What do you worry about most?" Henry asked. "Everything. Anything. Right now I'm worried about you." His eyebrows rose. "Me, that you'll get hurt or sick or decide this job isn't worth the trouble. That I'm too difficult to work for, that you'll leave and I'll be alone again." Katherine stopped, embarrassed by how much she had revealed. Henry set down his knife and wood and turned to face her fully. "Miss Newsome, Katherine, I'm not going anywhere. You don't know that. Anything could happen." "You're right," he agreed. "Anything could happen. I could get thrown by a horse tomorrow and break my neck. The barn could burn down. The cattle could stampede. But Katherine, all those worries you carry, they're not protecting you from bad things happening. They're just stealing your peace in the meantime. I know that." Katherine blinked back tears of frustration. "I know it's irrational. I know I should just stop, but I can't. It's like trying to stop breathing." Henry was quiet for a long moment, and Katherine braced herself for him to get up and walk away, to give up on this crazy woman who could not manage her own mind. Instead, he stood and held out his hand to her. "Come here." Katherine took his hand, surprised by the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. He led her down the porch steps and out into the yard, stopping where they could see the mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky and the first stars beginning to appear. "Give them to me," Henry said. "Give you what? Your worries. Tell me every single one of them right now, everything you're afraid of." Katherine stared at him. "That would take hours. I've got time." Henry squeezed her hand gently. "Go on, start talking." So she did. She told him about her fear of fire and flood and disease, her fear that she would make a terrible decision and lose everything her father had built, her fear that Jack and Samuel would realize she was incompetent and quit, her fear that winter would come early and harsh and they would lose cattle, her fear that she was broken somehow, that her mind was defective and she would never be normal. She told him about smaller worries too, that the chickens would stop laying, that the well would run dry, that she would burn dinner or leave a door open or forget something important. She told him about waking in the night with her heart racing, convinced the house was on fire or collapsing or under attack, only to find everything quiet and safe. Henry listened to all of it, his hand warm around hers, his expression serious and focused. When she finally ran out of words, her throat raw and her eyes wet with tears, he nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "I've got them now." "What? Your worries? You gave them to me and I'm taking them. They're mine now." Henry's voice was firm, almost solemn. "I'll carry them for you. You can rest." "That's not how it works," Katherine protested, but something in her chest had loosened at his words. "Why not? If you can carry them all by yourself, why can't I help carry them too?" Henry moved a step closer. "I'll worry about the cattle and the barn and the winter. I'll worry about Jack and Samuel and whether dinner burns. I'll check the doors at night and watch for fire. You can just be here right now without trying to prevent every possible disaster. But what if something happens and we weren't prepared? Then we'll deal with it together." Henry reached up with his free hand and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "You're not alone anymore, Katherine. I know you're used to managing everything by yourself, but you don't have to. Let me help. Let me take some of this burden." Katherine realized she was shaking. The idea of letting go, even a little, terrified her. What if something terrible happened because she stopped being vigilant? What if relaxing her guard for even a moment allowed disaster to slip through? But she was so tired, so desperately tired of being afraid all the time. "I don't know how to stop," she whispered. "One day at a time," Henry said. "One moment at a time. Right now, in this moment, what's wrong?" Katherine looked around. The evening was cool but not cold. The stars were bright overhead. The mountains stood solid and eternal. The house behind them was intact and peaceful. Henry's hand was warm in hers. "Nothing," she admitted. "Right now, nothing is wrong. Then stay here with me, just for now. Let tomorrow's worries wait for tomorrow." They stood together in the quiet yard, and Katherine focused on breathing, on the present moment, on the feeling of Henry's hand holding hers. It did not cure her anxiety. The worries still whispered at the edges of her mind, trying to reclaim her attention. But for the first time in years, she felt like someone else understood. Someone else saw her struggle and did not dismiss it or tell her to simply be stronger. Henry had taken her worries and offered to carry them himself. It was an impossible gift, but the gesture alone made something inside her begin to thaw. Over the following days, Katherine noticed that Henry was true to his word. When she started to spiral into worry about the coming cattle sale, he would step in with calm reassurance and practical plans. When she fretted about the fence repairs, he showed her the timeline and explained each step. When she woke in the night convinced she heard the barn collapsing, she would find him the next morning, and he would walk her out to see that everything was fine, solid, secure. He never made her feel foolish or weak. He simply carried what she could not, offering his strength without expecting anything in return. Katherine began to notice other things about Henry too. The way he was kind to the horses, speaking to them in a low, gentle voice. The way he helped Jack with a difficult fence post without being asked. The way he read in the evenings, working his way through the books in her father's library with obvious pleasure. The way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not watching, with an expression she could not quite name. She found herself watching him in return. Noticing the way he moved with such easy confidence, the way his hands were always busy with some task, the way he smiled at Samuel's terrible jokes. Henry was unlike anyone she had known in Hamilton. He was capable and calm and completely unafraid of hard work. He treated her like an equal partner rather than an incompetent woman who needed to be managed. One afternoon in late September, they rode out together to move some cattle to a different pasture. It was just the two of them, Jack and Samuel having taken the wagon into town for supplies. The work was harder than Katherine expected, pushing the stubborn animals through gates and along paths they did not want to follow. But Henry was patient, showing her how to position her horse, how to read the cattle's body language, how to use pressure and release to guide them. By the time they finished, Katherine was sweating and exhausted and exhilarated. They stopped to rest by a small creek, letting the horses drink while they sat in the shade of a massive cottonwood tree. "You did well today," Henry said, passing her his canteen. Katherine drank gratefully and handed it back. "I was terrified the whole time, convinced the cattle would stampede or I would fall off my horse or something terrible would happen. But you did it anyway. That's braver than not being afraid at all. Is it?" Katherine pulled her knees up to her chest. "I don't feel brave. I feel like a coward who's constantly running from shadows." Henry stretched out his legs and leaned back against the tree trunk. "My mother was like you," he said quietly, "afraid of everything." She worried constantly about my father when he was out working, about me and my sisters, about money and whether we had enough food stored for winter. It drove my father crazy sometimes. He didn't understand why she couldn't just trust that things would be all right. "What happened to her?" Katherine asked. "She died when I was 16. Fever took her quick." Henry's expression was distant, remembering. "After she was gone, I realized something. All her worrying had come from love. She was so afraid of losing us, of something happening to the people she cared about, that her mind tried to prepare for every possible danger. It wasn't weakness. It was just love that didn't know where else to go." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. "I never thought of it that way. Your mother's death hurt you so badly that your mind decided to try to prevent anything like that from ever happening again. It's not logical, but it makes sense in a sad kind of way." Henry turned to look at her. "You're not broken, Katherine. You're just someone who's been hurt and is trying to protect herself." "I don't know how to stop being afraid," Katherine said, "even when I want to." "Maybe you don't have to stop completely. Maybe you just have to decide that some things are worth being afraid for." Henry's gaze was steady, intent. "I'm afraid sometimes too. I was afraid when I offered to work for you, afraid you'd check my references and find something you didn't like, afraid I couldn't do the job well enough, afraid I'd disappoint you." "You could never disappoint me," Katherine said without thinking. Something shifted in Henry's expression. "Katherine, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you start worrying about all the reasons it's a bad idea." Her heart began to race. "All right. I care about you, more than I should, more than is probably appropriate given that you're my employer and I'm your foreman." Henry sat up straighter. "I know we haven't known each other long. I know you're still grieving your father and figuring out your life here. I know you've got enough on your mind without adding my feelings to the mix, but I couldn't keep carrying this without telling you." Katherine stared at him, her mind spinning. Henry cared about her. Henry had feelings for her. This capable, kind, patient man was telling her that she mattered to him as more than just an employer or a friend. "Say something," Henry said, his confidence wavering slightly. "Even if it's to tell me I'm an idiot and this is completely inappropriate." "I don't think you're an idiot," Katherine managed. "I'm just surprised. Why would you care about someone like me? Someone who's afraid of everything, who can barely function without having a crisis, who's more trouble than she's worth. You're not any of those things." Henry reached out and took her hand. "You're brave and honest and trying so hard to build something good here. You're kind to Jack and Samuel. You take care of the chickens even though you worry about hawks constantly. You read your father's letters even though they hurt. You came here alone and faced your grief instead of running from it. You're remarkable, Katherine. I wish you could see yourself the way I see you." "I'm terrified," Katherine whispered. "I'm terrified of this, of you, of feeling something for someone because what if I lose you? What if something happens? What if this is a mistake? What if it's not?" Henry countered gently. "What if being together makes both our lives better? What if we help each other carry what's too heavy to bear alone? What if we build something good here together?" Katherine looked at their joined hands, at the way Henry's fingers wrapped around hers with such care. She thought about the weeks they had spent working side by side, the way he had listened to her fears without judgment, the way he had taken her worries and offered to carry them himself. She thought about how safe she felt when he was near, how the constant anxiety quieted just a little in his presence. "I care about you too," she admitted, the words feeling both terrifying and right. "I have for a while. I just didn't think I had any business feeling that way. I didn't think anyone would want someone as damaged as me." "You're not damaged," Henry said fiercely. "And I want you, Katherine, all of you, worries included." He leaned toward her slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Katherine did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted to know what it felt like to be held by someone who understood her fears and cared for her anyway. Their kiss was gentle, tentative, sweet in a way that made Katherine's chest ache. Henry's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb stroking her cheek, and Katherine felt something settle into place inside her. This was right. This was worth the fear. When they pulled apart, Henry was smiling. "We should probably head back before Jack and Samuel return from town and start gossip about where we've been." Katherine laughed, surprised by the lightness she felt. "They probably already gossip about us." "Probably," Henry agreed, "but let's not give them additional ammunition." They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence, and Katherine felt something she had not experienced in years. Hope. Maybe she could build a life here. Maybe she could learn to manage her fears well enough to let happiness in. Maybe she could have this, have Henry, have a future that was not constantly overshadowed by imagined disasters. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and quiet moments stolen together. Henry was careful about propriety, never coming into the house when they were alone, always maintaining respectful boundaries. But there were touches that lingered, smiles that meant more than they showed, conversations that stretched late into the evening as they sat on the porch and talked about everything and nothing. Katherine found herself looking forward to mornings because Henry would be there. Found herself volunteering for tasks that meant they would work together. Found herself thinking about him when she should have been thinking about cattle or fences or supply orders. She was falling in love, she realized, with a mixture of joy and terror. Falling in love with a cowboy who took her worries and carried them himself, who saw her at her worst and stayed anyway, who made her believe she might be worth loving after all. In early October, they began preparations for bringing the cattle down from summer pasture and selecting the steers for market. It was a complex operation that required all four of them working together. Katherine watched Henry coordinate with Jack and Samuel, impressed by his calm leadership and practical problem-solving. On the day they moved the herd, Katherine rode with them, her confidence on horseback much improved after weeks of daily practice. The cattle flowed down the mountain trails like a river, their hooves thunder against the ground, their breath steaming in the cold morning air. It was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely thrilling. They penned the herd in the corrals near the barn and spent the next several days sorting them. The steers selected for market were separated into one pen, the breeding stock into another. It required careful evaluation of each animal, checking their condition and conformation and temperament. Katherine learned to read cattle in a way she had never imagined possible. Learned to see which animals were thriving and which needed extra attention. Learned to make the hard decisions about which steers would bring the best price and which heifers had the best potential as future breeders. Henry worked beside her, explaining his thinking, asking for her opinion, treating her like a genuine partner rather than a student. Katherine felt competent for the first time since arriving at the ranch, felt like maybe she could do this after all. The cattle buyer arrived in mid-October, a shrewd older man named Morrison who had done business with her father for years. He walked through the pens, examining the steers with a critical eye, then made his offer. Katherine's immediate instinct was to panic. What if the price was too low? What if she should negotiate harder? What if she made a mistake that would cost them money they desperately needed? But Henry was there, his presence a steadying force. He leaned close and whispered, "That's a fair price. Your father usually got within $1 of that. You can accept it without worry." So Katherine did, shaking Morrison's hand and watching as he counted out payment in crisp bills. It was more money than she had ever held at once, and the weight of it was both reassuring and frightening. After Morrison left with the steers loaded into his cattle cars at the rail station, Katherine stood in the empty corral and felt tears slide down her face. "What's wrong?" Henry asked immediately, moving to her side. "Nothing's wrong," Katherine said, laughing through her tears. "That's just it. Nothing went wrong. We moved the cattle, we sorted them, we made the sale. It all worked out. I kept waiting for disaster, and it never came." Henry pulled her into his arms, and Katherine let herself lean against his solid warmth. "It won't always go this smoothly," he said honestly. "There will be hard times and setbacks. But Katherine, you did this. You ran your first cattle sale successfully. You should be proud." "I couldn't have done it without you," Katherine said into his chest. "We're partners," Henry reminded her. "That means we do it together." That evening, Katherine invited Henry to dinner in the house. Propriety be damned. She cooked the best meal she could manage, using her improved skills at the stove to produce beef and vegetables, and even a passable pie. They ate at the dining table, talking and laughing, and afterwards sat in the parlor by the fire. "I've been thinking," Katherine said, gathering her courage, "about the future, about what I want." Henry set down his coffee cup and gave her his full attention. "And what do you want?" "I want you to stay, not just as my foreman, but as my partner in truth. I want to build this ranch into something lasting, something good. I want to face the hard times together, celebrate the good times together. I want you." Katherine took a shaky breath. "I'm still afraid. I'm still worried about 1,000 things that may never happen, but I don't want fear to keep me from having what matters most." Henry crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Katherine Newsome, are you asking me to court you properly, with intentions toward marriage?" "I suppose I am," Katherine said, feeling her cheeks flush. "Is that too forward? Should I have waited for you to ask?" "I love that you asked," Henry said, grinning. "And my answer is yes. Yes to courting, yes to partnership, yes to building a future together, yes to all of it." He kissed her then, deeper and more passionate than their first tentative kiss by the creek. Katherine wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring into it all the hope and fear and desperate longing she had been carrying. They courted through the autumn and into the early winter, learning each other in the quiet way of people building something meant to last. Henry moved his things from the bunkhouse to the small bedroom downstairs, maintaining propriety while being close enough for Katherine to feel safe. They worked together daily, their partnership deepening as Katherine's knowledge and confidence grew. Jack and Samuel were delighted by the developing relationship, having apparently placed bets on how long it would take for Henry and Katherine to admit their feelings. They became protective of Katherine in a brotherly way, and she found herself with something she had not had since leaving Hamilton. A family. Katherine still worried, still fought against the anxiety that was part of her nature. But now, when the fears threatened to overwhelm her, she had Henry to turn to. He would listen to every worry, acknowledge each fear, and then gently remind her to return to the present moment. He carried the burden with her, lightening the load enough that she could function, could thrive, could build the life she was beginning to believe she deserved. In December, Henry proposed officially, getting down on one knee in the barn on a snowy morning after they finished the feeding. He offered her a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, and Katherine said yes through happy tears. They were married in Glenwood Springs on a cold January day in 1884, with Jack and Samuel standing as witnesses and half the town in attendance. Katherine wore a dress of deep blue wool that her aunt had sent from Hamilton along with her blessing and love. Henry wore his best suit, and the marshal gave Katherine away since her father was gone and she had no other male relative present. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Katherine felt something she had rarely experienced: complete happiness in the present moment, untainted by fear of the future. They held a reception at the ranch, the house full of neighbors and new friends, and Katherine realized she had built something here. Not just a successful cattle operation, but a home. A place where she belonged, where people cared about her, where she could be herself with all her fears and flaws and still be loved. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, Henry carried Katherine over the threshold of what was now their bedroom. They made love slowly, tenderly, and Katherine marveled at the gift of intimacy without fear, of being completely known and completely accepted. "I worried this day would never come," she whispered against Henry's shoulder as they lay tangled together afterward. "Worried I was too broken for anyone to love." "You were never broken," Henry said, kissing her forehead. "Just bent a little. And I love every part of you," Katherine weighed, the strong parts and the scared parts alike. The years that followed were not without challenges. They lost cattle to a harsh winter in 1886. They survived a drought in 1887 that made Katherine's anxiety spike terribly until the rains finally came. They dealt with rustlers and illness and the constant demands of running a ranch in difficult country. But they dealt with everything together. Henry took Katherine's worries and carried them, just as he had promised that first evening on the porch. And Katherine learned, slowly, to trust that she did not have to face every disaster alone. She learned to lean on Henry's strength, to accept help from Jack and Samuel, to build a community of neighbors who supported each other through hard times. In the spring of 1885, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. The news sent her into a spiral of worry about all the things that could go wrong with pregnancy and childbirth, all the dangers that awaited their child in the world. But Henry held her through the fears, reminded her to stay present, and celebrated each milestone of the pregnancy with genuine joy. Their son was born in December of that year, a healthy boy with Henry's dark hair and Katherine's blue eyes. They named him Thomas, after Henry's father, and Katherine fell completely in love in a way that was both wonderful and terrifying. She had so much more to lose now, so much more to worry about, but she had also learned something important over the 2 years since coming to Colorado. Worry did not protect the people she loved. It did not prevent bad things from happening. All it did was steal her joy in the good moments, the present moments, the precious time with her husband and son that she would never get back. So Katherine made a choice, every day, sometimes every hour, to return to the present. To feel baby Thomas's weight in her arms and his warm breath against her neck. To watch Henry's face light up when he came in from the cold and saw his family waiting. To notice the beauty of snow on the mountains and the comfort of a warm fire and the satisfaction of work well done. She still worried. That never completely went away. But the worries no longer ruled her life, no longer defined who she was. She was Katherine Wade, wife and mother and rancher, and she was enough exactly as she was. A daughter followed 3 years later, named Margaret after Katherine's aunt, and another son 2 years after that. The ranch grew and prospered under their joint management. Jack married a woman from town and built a small house on the property for his family. Samuel eventually left to start his own ranch further west, and they hired 2 young cowboys to replace him. Katherine kept in regular correspondence with her aunt in Hamilton, and every few years they would make the journey to Nevada so the children could know their great-aunt. Margaret was getting older, slowing down, but her mind remained sharp and her love constant. She told Katherine how proud she was of the life she had built, the family she had created, the fears she had learned to manage. On their 10th anniversary, Henry and Katherine stood on the porch of their home and looked out over the ranch they had built together. The children were asleep inside, the cattle were settled for the night, and the mountains stood eternal against the stars. "You ever regret it?" Katherine asked, leaning against Henry's side. "Taking on a wife who came with so much baggage?" "Never," Henry said firmly. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Katherine, and your worries aren't baggage. They're just part of who you are, same as my stubbornness or my terrible singing voice." Katherine laughed. "Your singing is truly awful. See, we all have our flaws." Henry kissed the top of her head. "But together we make something pretty good." "Better than good," Katherine corrected. "We make something wonderful." She meant it. Despite all her fears, despite all the challenges and setbacks and difficult moments, they had built something wonderful. A marriage based on honesty and partnership and deep abiding love. A family that was healthy and happy. A ranch that thrived. A home that felt safe. Katherine still had moments when the anxiety overwhelmed her, when she worried about disease or drought or disaster befalling her family. But those moments were fewer and farther between, and when they came, Henry was always there. Taking her worries, carrying them with her, reminding her that they were in this together and always would be. Years turned into decades. The children grew up and started families of their own. Thomas took over the ranch operations, showing his mother's keen mind for business and his father's steady calm with the cattle. Margaret married a doctor and moved to Denver, and the youngest, James, became a veterinarian who served the ranching community throughout western Colorado. Katherine and Henry grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down, but their love only deepening with time. They sat on the porch in their retirement years, watching their grandchildren play in the yard, and Katherine marveled at the life they had created. "I worried I would die young like my mother," she told Henry one summer evening when they were both in their 60s. "I was so convinced I wouldn't live to be old." "And yet here you are," Henry said, taking her hand. His grip was not as strong as it had been, his hands twisted slightly with arthritis, but the gesture carried the same meaning it always had. "Here we are together." "Thank you," Katherine said softly, "for taking my worries all those years ago, for carrying them when they were too heavy for me, for loving me when I couldn't love myself." "It was the easiest thing I ever did," Henry said. "Loving you has been the great privilege of my life," Katherine weighed. They sat together as the sun set behind the mountains, two people who had started as strangers and become something inseparable. Katherine rested her head on Henry's shoulder and felt at peace in a way that once would have seemed impossible. She still worried sometimes. Worried about her children and grandchildren, about the ranch's future, about losing Henry, about all the ways life could change in an instant. But the worries no longer consumed her. They were just part of the landscape of her mind, acknowledged but not obeyed. Henry Wade had taken her worries and carried them himself, just as he had promised on that long-ago evening when she confessed her constant fears. He had shown her that love was not the absence of fear, but the presence of someone willing to face the fear alongside you. He had given her the greatest gift, the courage to live fully despite her anxious mind, to embrace joy even while acknowledging that loss was possible, to build a life worth living even though life was fragile and uncertain. Katherine lived to be 78 years old, dying peacefully in her sleep with Henry beside her, and her children gathered close. At her funeral, Thomas told the story of how his mother had come to Colorado afraid and alone, and how his father had helped her find her courage. How they had built the ranch together, raised their family together, faced every challenge together. Henry followed her 2 years later, and they were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had loved. The land passed to Thomas and continued to thrive for generations, a testament to the foundation Katherine and Henry had laid. But more than the land, more than the buildings or the cattle or the business, what endured was the story of their love. A story about a woman who worried constantly, and a cowboy who took her worries and carried them himself. A story about finding courage not in the absence of fear, but in the presence of someone who makes the fear bearable. A story about building something lasting in uncertain times, about choosing hope over anxiety, about the transformative power of being truly seen and truly loved. It was a story their grandchildren told their children, and those children told theirs, passing down through the years the lesson that Katherine and Henry had learned together, that we all carry worries and fears, but we were never meant to carry them alone. That love means helping shoulder each other's burdens, whatever form those burdens take. That partnership, real partnership, means taking what is too heavy for one person and dividing the weight between two. The ranch still stands today, over a century later, still in the Wade family, still running cattle on those same mountain pastures. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blows down from the peaks and the stars shine bright overhead, you might almost hear the echo of two people sitting on that old porch. A woman confessing her fears, and a man promising to carry them. A promise kept not just for a moment, but for a lifetime and beyond.